So last time, and I told you that we wanted to kind of do a back-to-back video, or you should watch both of them back-to-back. Last time we talked about An Original Man by Claude Andrew Clegg III, and it's essentially the life and times of Elijah Muhammad. Today we're going to talk about The Messenger, The Rise and Fall of Elijah Muhammad, which was written by Karl Evanzz with 2 Z's. Much of what was said about Clegg's book, An Original Man, can be said here, so you can see my other review in the links below and on the channel. Karl Evanzz packs an explosive amount of information into this volume. You can see how thick this book is. Much more than a mere analysis of Elijah the movement or Elijah the man. Evanzz attempts to set the context in which the NOI, the Nation of Islam, developed. He chronicles Elijah Muhammad's life, and he attempts to draw connections between the movements and men that surrounded him. He covers, in what Clegg did not cover, the Moorish Science Temple connection, something that Clegg completely disregards. Now, there does seem to be sizable evidence that Elijah was a member, and I find it hard to believe that it was as life-changing or such a source of solace as Evanzz' prose would make you think, meaning his time in the Moorish Science Temple. If that was the case, and Elijah was such a devoted member, then he probably would have heard of the schism in leadership after Drew Ali's demise. If he had heard of it, then how could Fard be such of a mystery man to him, given that Fard was a supposed successor, however nominal, to Drew Ali? That's a question that remains unanswered, and Fard Muhammad's, W.D. Fard's connection to the whole movement still needs a lot more explanation. While both Evanzz and Clegg draw on the UNIA influence and mention other messianic figures and movements that preceded the NOI, Evanzz draws on MSTA connections, and no connection whatsoever is made to the early predecessor to both the UNIA and the MSTA, that being Dusay Muhammad Ali's Universal Islamic Society, established in 1926 in Detroit. Now, as a, just as an aside, there was a large cache of documents that was found in a house in Pittsburgh that was left by Dusay Muhammad Ali. And so I'm sure that there's a lot more interesting history that's going to come up about this period of Muslims and pseudo-Islamic movements in the United States at that time. One thing that's left out of Clegg's work and that's found here are Sunni currents that are present in the U.S. They're underscored in Clegg's work. Now, comparing the two works, Sunni currents present in the U.S. are actually underscored in Clegg's work, while Evanzz makes hardly a mention of them, much less highlighting Sunni opposition to the Nation of Islam as Clegg does. Instead, he presents Elijah and the Nation of Islam as attempting to court foreign favor and funding. This last point really warrants further analysis. Why would they court foreign powers, yet espouse a do-for-self philosophy? Why would, if Clegg's depiction of vehement Sunni opposition to NOI doctrine in public is true, would such foreign powers believe Elijah Muhammad over one of their own, such as Jamil Diab, the Palestinian figure that was actually a teacher to Elijah Muhammad's children in Chicago? I feel that Malcolm X here factors into the equation much more than is let on, and that was probably his insistence that led to these meetings, not Elijah himself. Add to that Malcolm quickly reconnected with these people after his excommunication, and the picture becomes clearer. What that really suggests is that Malcolm X's trip that's mentioned in his autobiography to Hajj is known not to be his first trip to the Middle East, and possibly not the epiphany or the self-fulfilling prophecy that we're kind of led to believe in his own autobiography, and where most of us are much more familiar with through the movie. It may be, however, that as suggested by Ernest X. McGee, aka Hamas Abdul Khalis, that there was a nascent Sunni undercurrent in the Nation of Islam, one that sought to change things from the inside out. Now, this point is lost on the author, and he does not fully hash out the ramifications of this and the ramifications of some of his suppositions, however plausible, as understood from the sources and their effects on his work. Had he handled this and other points as he did with Joseph Gravitt Jr.'s, aka Joseph X, aka Yusuf Shah's usurpation of power in the Nation of Islam's East Coast, and his ability to blackmail Elijah based on what he knew of his involvement with the MSTA, along with Gravitt Sr., Yusuf Shah's father, more sense could have been made of this episode and an inner window into the reality of Elijah Muhammad's relationship with W.D. Fard would become much clearer. The relationship between the two, the hero worship, and the eventual deification that became NOI canon, was this something that was taught, or was it a ruse that was invented by Fard and Elijah to take advantage of down-and-out blacks in Depression-era Detroit? That's a question that remains. Contextualization is a strong point of the book. At times when reading Clegg's work, I was unable to relate to the reasons why certain things were, while in Evanz's book, the work, the rhyme and the reason is very easily discernible. He does a great job of contextualizing. Clegg's work almost wholly whitewashes the Black Power struggle post-Malcolm and Martin, while Evanzz actually goes into great detail, almost burdensome detail at times. However burdensome Evanz's context might seem, it adds to a holistic view of Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam in historical, ideological, and theological context. For example, why would such a strong connection be drawn between Asian cultures, and particularly the Japanese, when discussing worldly retribution against the white race? This is one of the core concepts that was taught in early NOI teachings, the 19 Japanese pilots piloting a spaceship. Right? Obviously, one can just accept NOI theology on the issue, but the context in which these connections were drawn informs us of so much more. A Japanese agent, Takahashi, working to drum up support for the Japanese war effort and cause sedition against the Allied powers, was actively influencing black nationalist movements with rhetoric and financial support. Add to that the news of flying saucers and Japanese air power, and you've got a recipe for a very highly suggestive narrative that comes about. The whole dimension of Elijah's life is left unexplored in Clegg's work, where he characterizes Elijah's days on the run as a result of personal power struggles between him and other Fard followers. Evanzz, on the other hand, brings much more detail, showing Elijah's migration, his hijrah, to be a culmination of his claims to prophecy and succession, which other W.D. Fard followers rejected, along with his revisionist theology of Fard's nature, as well as a result of government persecution and pursuit for draft evasion. So he evaded the draft and he was being sought out, and sedition charges, which were a result of his dealings with Takahashi, the Japanese agent. This Asian connection, along with the supposition that W.D. Fard was actually of partial or full South Asian descent, shows clearly why Fard would describe himself as an Asiatic black man, not just a black man, and the effect that this would have on NOI theology as a whole. Evanzz capitalizes on the FBI files on Elijah, Clara, and all the surrounding cast of the NOI and their rival organizations. Of course, this is used as a reason to reject his conclusions by some people, and the fact that Evanzz doesn't make his disdain for Elijah and his inner circle a secret, or does not offer any support to the veracity of his claims. The FBI and the police files used, however, give very interesting insight into Elijah and his movement, and is almost the sole source for information on W.D. Fard's connection to the movement outside of Nation of Islam canon. Fard's identity is explored in some detail, and interesting facts are mentioned from non-governmental sources. For instance, Elijah contends that Fard gave him an English translation of the Quran that was from Pakistan. However, Pakistan didn't exist until the early 50s. While neither Clegg nor Evanzz make the connection, Elijah's more than spurious travels to Pakistan from the 50s then on seems to lend credence to either Fard's presence there, or at least the connection that the Nation of Islam had early on with the Indo-Pak world, and specifically the Ahmadiyya movement therein. Evanzz deduces that Elijah's statements exhibit an ongoing relationship between the entire Muhammad family and Fard, to the exclusion of Malcolm X. The claims are even made that Fard remained in the US, and that Hamas Abdul Khalis' statement that Fard was present and known to James Shabazz and others is used to give credence to this claim. Hamas Abdul Khalis actually being the one who left and started the Hanafi movement that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was involved in. So along with the involvement of people using some of Fard's aliases around the same time and places, all of this information comes together to give us a clearer picture of the man. If his presence was known, but Malcolm X, and this is the interesting point, if his presence was known, that is W.D. Fard, but Malcolm X was kept out of this Fardian inner circle, what would the reasons be? Wouldn't Elijah Muhammad want Malcolm, who he considered to be the son he never had, to meet the man or God that he claimed, who had been the source for both him and Malcolm's transformation? If not, is this evidence of greater collusion? Evanzz splices his literary style with fact and narrative and a bit of vitriol. That's open secret in the book. He goes into much more detail about Elijah's affairs. He mentions intimate details not covered by Clegg about these issues. He characterizes Claire Muhammad's indignation of her husband's actions and presents her feelings in a very personable way. I mean, I was actually drawn into the persona of Claire Muhammad through reading this book. Family life or lack thereof is explored in more detail, with Elijah's children being set up for material by their father, but being made wholly dependent on him for any means of success outside of the Nation of Islam. W.D. Muhammad's struggle with his father is gone into in much more detail than in the first book, as is Akbar Muhammad's interactions and subsequent departure from NOI. The corrosive tone that Evanzz takes increases towards the end of the book, especially when certain things surface. At one point, it's very clear that if Malcolm's demise meant the end of righteousness and discipline in the Nation of Islam, then the rise of Louis Farrakhan, i.e. Louis Wilcott, signals their end. He all but indicts the latter of ordering for Malcolm X's assassination and insinuates his involvement of the festering of criminal element within the NOI. Despite this, he only passingly covers Elijah's complacency to this element and instead focuses on how the largest black nationalist movement in the USA was increasingly being run by whites. A clear contradiction and what some saw as blatant hypocrisy. His tone settles when dealing with Elijah towards the end of the book, and he almost seems to present him as a man whom both time and bad health had whittled away. He characterizes him as softening on his separatist and racist beliefs. Several instances other than Elijah's famous Savior's Day remarks on whites exhibit some of a sort of a repentant tone on the part of Elijah Muhammad. The author instead places the onus of blame on Elijah's followers as being responsible for destroying his legacy. The only one to escape this, the disdain of the author, is his son, W.D. Muhammad, whom he credits with being the only credible person to represent Elijah's legacy, not in theological terms, but in having stayed true to the essential do-for-self methodology and philosophy that was first espoused by his father, while all others, simply denigrated into selfish opportunists, insisting on bilking their followers. This work is an essential work on the subject, but is marred at times by stylistics and emotions that peek through the facts and the assumptions. Another low point is the haphazard quoting of facts and statements before introducing or reintroducing the person involved. And this leaves the reader at an immediate loss, sends you scurrying through to reconnect with previous pages and chapters. Clegg's work, however, does not face this problem even once. It's, in that sense, it's much better. Both books offer a wealth of information and personalities that deserve their own works and compilations. Evanzz is a good addition to Clegg's work, but if your goal is to gain more of a holistic idea of who Elijah Muhammad was, what the Nation of Islam was about, and kind of how they formed, then it should be just that. It should be an addition to Clegg's work, but not a replacement. If you've enjoyed this review, check out the other videos that are on the channel, share it with your friends, and we'll see you for the upcoming review.